everyone, and welcome to the Friday, May 15th, 2020 Montgomery County Council meeting. Today we have one item on our agenda, which is an action item for a resolution to adopt Executive Order 067-20 to extend the stay-at-home order. I'm going to ask Bob Drummer from our staff to please explain it to us, and then we're going to go forward. I know that everybody, pretty much everybody to my knowledge, has a very tight schedule today, so we're going to try to keep this as succinct as we possibly can. Mr. Drummer, please.
Good afternoon. The governor, as you know, issued an original state of emergency on March 5th. He issued an executive order on March 30th, which was generally called a stay-at-home order, and that required businesses, and well, we all know what it required. And just this week, the governor issued an executive order on May 13th, indicating that as of today at 5 p.m., he was starting to reopen the state. And in order to, and realizing that every portion of the state was not the same, he included in the order authority for political subdivisions to issue more restrictive orders, in other words, keep things closed for a while. Relying on that authority granted by the governor, County Executive Elrich has issued an executive order just today that would extend the governor's, and it's based on the governor's March 30th stay-at-home order, would extend it for an indefinite period of time until certain criteria are met, criteria that I believe were developed in coordination with Dr. Gales, who is here. The order, whether or not the county council needs to approve it, is really unclear at this point. But what is clear is the county council cannot amend it. It's an executive order. We can't amend it. The council could ask the executive to amend it. But if the council doesn't approve it, the executive order remains issued by the county executive. I mean, he's issued it, but its enforceability may not be quite as clear over the weekend, at least before the council, without the council weighing in and approving it. So there's a packet in front of you. You've got the executive order. The packet includes an order that was not actually signed by the executive yet, but I think the web includes one that he did sign. It's the same order. And it simply continues the stay-at-home order. The executive's plan is, since it's relying on the original governor's order, and the governor's legal staff has provided several interpretive memorandums and responses to questions, that we would rely on those interpretations for this order, since it's based on that, and it is virtually identical. And the criteria for lifting the order are what Dr. Gales had explained to you yesterday in the council meeting. The number sustained over 14 days decrease in the number of new cases, the related hospitalization rate, ICU rate, fatalities, similar illnesses presenting to healthcare systems, percentage of acute bed usage, percentage of ICU bed usage, percentage of emergency critical care equipment being used by COVID-19 patients, sustained capacity to test 5% of the population per month, a sustained flattening or decrease in test positivity, sustained system for contact tracing, and a meaningful infrastructure to identify and begin addressing demonstrated COVID-19 related inequities in health outcomes. That's basically what it is. I know you may have a lot of questions about specifics in there, and I can try and answer them, and Dr. Gales is here to answer them, as well as Sylvia Kinch from the County Attorney's Office, who drafted the executive order. And I think I'll stop at this point and wait for more questions.
Thank you very much, Bob. Just to be clear, so we can either vote for the executive order or vote against the executive order, but we cannot change the executive order. We could request that there be some changes, but we could not change it.
Right. You could defer voting, or you could vote to not approve it, or you could vote to approve it. But right, you can't amend it. It's because it's an executive order. It's similar to a regulation. You can't amend it. You can simply ask to have the executive amend it. And it could be amended at any time by the executive. So even if you approved it and asked for amendments, he could amend it next week or later today or whatever, if he agreed.
And if any of those amendments that he were to make, does that need to come back? If he were to do it. I'm not suggesting he ask for any, but if that were to happen.
Well, again, it depends on whether, how significant an amendment it is, whether it's really substantive, I think.
Yeah, I know we're in uncharted waters. Okay, we have a few people that would like to speak. Because everybody was very kind and fit this into their schedule today, and I know that everybody has many other things to do, I'm going to ask for that 5-minute rule that we did last time. So Councilmember Albernaz is the first speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me just state up front that I fully support this executive order. I appreciate the leadership of Dr. Gales and appreciate the governor's willingness to afford flexibility to jurisdictions that clearly do not meet the standards by which we have set forth, which I think are reasonable and accurate. We have been receiving briefings on a weekly basis that continue to discuss the challenges with regards to testing, the fact that the numbers continue to go up, and I am concerned that some of those benchmarks haven't been met at the state level either. And so the point was raised by others previously, questions as to what numbers the state is seeing versus the county, because it is crystal clear that here in Montgomery County, in our neighboring jurisdictions in Prince George's County as well, the two largest counties and jurisdictions across the entire state, we are not prepared at this point. And while I know, understandably, there is frustration, there is concern, there is continuing economic challenges that this has created in ways that are significant and profound. But we absolutely must continue to follow the science. And that is very clear at this point, that we are not prepared to be able to move forward. And so I support the executive order, acknowledge that there are understandably questions that we want to make sure we ask, specifically so that our public understands what this is and is not. But I think it's very important for us as a body, and I know my colleagues agree, that we are not prepared in order to support this executive order so that we don't compound some of the confusing messages that are out there. Now with that, I do have a couple of questions. and I think I'm about 2.5 minutes in, so I've got 2.5 minutes
You
left.
are. I'm telling
All right.
you.
But Dr. Gales, I don't believe, as some other jurisdictions, that we have set forth a date to target for reopening. I know the District of Columbia, as an example, has listed June 8th, and understandably there are these benchmarks that we have to hit, and so that could be why we didn't select a specific date. But if you could please elaborate on your thinking around that, and if there would be some consideration as these benchmarks are hit to give our public some sense, a ballpark, which I know is very much a moving target, but for people to be able to plan accordingly.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It feels like we just worked together not too long ago. So thank you for your support, and I'll try not to eat up into your time. But to your question, so for the very reason that you laid out, we didn't put a specific time frame on the measures. However, the time frame that we're thinking through is consistent with our colleagues in DC and Northern Virginia. Our goal is to make the measures that we put forth readily available. I know this is a question that will probably come up in other comments, is to make that information live on our website so that folks can follow along at home. Some of the measures we have already made progress in, and I know that will speak to some of the other questions. And so I anticipate our time frame, again, is consistent, even though we didn't set a specific date, is consistent with the thinking of our colleagues in our nearby jurisdictions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gales. And among the more common questions I'm being asked by constituents right now is, does this mean that I can go to the other parts of the state that have alleviated their restrictions and spend a day trip on the beach in Ocean City or spend the night there and then come back? Could you advise us on what to tell constituents who want to abide by the restrictions, understand the concerns, but understandably are feeling that cabin fever and the anxiousness to want to be able to get out?
Sure. We still recommend that folks shelter in place and follow those guidelines because, one, it could create risk for those places that they're going to. Particularly, a lot of those places don't have, or at least to date, have not seen a lot of cases. And so the concern for them is folks coming in and bringing that into their jurisdictions, as well as the reality of when going to those places, there's a risk of coming into contact with folks and bringing it back home. So we recognize that quarantine fever is real. And again, the hope, though, is that continued enforcement of these measures, they have been impactful in terms of bringing down, though certainly we still have a lot of cases, but bringing down as how bad as they could have been. But continuation of those will help drive us to where we need to be to hit those metrics.
Thank you. And that's my 5 minutes, so I will defer.
That is your 5 minutes. Andrew, your 5 minutes are up. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for playing by the rules. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Dr. Gale. So just to follow up on the previous question, the order is to remain at home except for essential trips, which are then elaborated in the regulation. So I think the answer to that would be only if it's an essential trip, which there are a number of exceptions to it. But it is. So overall, the only regulation is a continuance. It's replicating the state's existing regulation, which expires tonight at 5 p.m. Is that correct, Dr. Gales?
Yes.
So there wasn't any modifications. We didn't tweak it in any way. We just took the existing May 6th regulation and said this is now going to be our regulation. Is that right?
Well, so yes, and to some degree, again, and I know this will speak to some of the other questions that we received. We met extensively with our colleagues from Northern Virginia, our colleagues in DC, as well as our colleagues in Maryland to discuss the metrics that we're using. So what we're putting forward has been discussed across the region with other health officers and officials so that even though they don't match necessarily 100%, they are consistent with what we're looking at. And the consensus decision was that we would all continue the restrictions that have been put into place as closely as possible.
But just to be really precise, though, the background, which is where what you just described, is elaborated upon. the criteria that we would look to reopen. That's in the background of this executive order. The actual order itself is an order to remain at home. There isn't a regulatory power of the background information that you describe, which is our framework for reopening. That is not a regulation. That is, a policy framework. But what we are doing today, if I'm understanding what our action is, we are imposing the stay-at-home order that otherwise will expire.
Yes.
And everything else is policy content, but it is not actually an order. The order is continue with the stay-at-home order, and then you've provided criteria for how that could be lifted.
Yes.
So that's a conversation essentially for another day, in a way, because while that is relevant to what it will take to reopen, what we're doing today is we are approving a regulation that will require people to remain at home, and it's those same essential trips that we have all been operating under. It's that framework.
Yes.
So, I think the overall message to the public is continue, remain at home, right? This is a remain at home order. Keep continuing under the framework we've been continuing under. We have a framework about reopening that has been presented to the council. That's not a regulation in and of itself. In order for us to lift something, we're going to have to come back and issue a new, either remove this regulation or issue a revised regulation, because there's no self-executing component of this. The framework in the background there's not like a trigger point where when those things have been met, this regulation is no longer operable. We must come back with the executive to lift it, or the executive could lift it. We don't know legally, whether one of those options is better than another. But, that's for another day. Is that all accurate, Dr. Gales?
As best I can tell, like I said, we're basically saying nothing changes from what we've been doing before.
Exactly. And the framework about reopening is a policy framework that is not a regulation. You've presented that. It looks fine. I think we could refine it, in coming weeks and make it more of a public dashboard and all these kinds of things that we can do around communications. But it isn't even, I don't know if we're actually adopting it as a policy today. It is in the background of a regulation. I'm not sure that it is a policy, but, I think we welcome it as a well-considered framework. I guess that'd be my take on it. Okay, thank you, Dr. Gales. Thank you, Sid.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I also agree with this approach. I want to also thank the leadership of the Washington Metropolitan Region, because I know that this has to be a regional effort. And so I want to express my appreciation for this collaboration. I understand that we do have, preliminary good news, which means that what we have been doing thus far is working, but we're not at a level yet where we can reliably say that we are ready to open up. And if we would do that, we run the very real risk of the spike and the surge. And so that is so important for our residents to understand. We're all anxious and want to go out, but it is true that we have worked diligently, and we have been able to at least ensure that our hospitals are not seeing the same issues in other jurisdictions where the surge was just not manageable. But that can change very quickly. And so I think it is important for everybody to understand what this means. And also very important, the minute that, we approve this, et cetera, for all of our communication staff to put forth very, succinct information that quickly and in a very, clear way says, this is what we're doing. Because I know that there will be tons and tons of questions and confusion, et cetera. But I do agree. I also understand. I know we're all eager and anxious to get out. But in my sense, and we have had these briefings, twice a week, et cetera. My sense is that we have got to respect the science and understand that we are headed in a positive direction. And if we were to relax all of this, we could be back, we can go backwards and then be in a situation that it's much more serious, and then it would take us longer to perhaps begin that gradual opening. So again, I want to thank everyone here. Dr. Gales, thank you so much for the role that you're playing, and not only in Montgomery County, but I think in the region. And thank those leaders who have decided to continue to work collaboratively to send the same message as well. I also had a similar question about, putting forth a date, but I do agree that it is so much harder, and there's just so much confusion that if we put a date out there and then we can't meet it, we're back to the confusion again. So hopefully we can provide, ongoing updates and continue to inform our community as much as possible. So I think those are just my observations. I don't have a lot of questions because I know we've all received a lot of information. I think this is the right move for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add one thing real quickly to say on the regional standpoint? Thank you also, Councilmember Navarro, for your leadership on the regional perspective. When we're in the health officer call, we hear your name brought up a lot in terms of moving the COG elected officials forward. So thank you for that support on that end.
Thank you. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Dr. Gales. I also agree wholeheartedly this is the right step to take, and the message that we should be sending loud and clear is remain at home. If there's any ambiguity, which I know there is, and there's ambiguity combined with quarantine fever are not a good combination. And so we need to try to remove the ambiguity and lack of clarity to the extent that there is any. And as my colleagues have stated, I associate myself with their remarks to the public, the millions watching at home. As I always say, stay at home. We have to limit the transition. Let's not give up all the progress that we've made so that we can at some point start to re-enter in a phased approach, which will happen over time. And so I want to thank Dr. Gales for being quick along with the county executive, and I think this is the right approach for us to do it as the Board of Health and affirm the executive order, and everyone sending a strong message along with County Executive also Brooks and with our partners in Northern Virginia and our partners in Washington, D.C., that we are all lockstep on doing this. I did this for the first time the other day. We want to avoid this, which is what I saw yesterday on my walk. I take this walk every day. This is the park school near my house. Normally, no one is there. You saw this is what was going on at about 5 o'clock yesterday. So I think there is a serious concern that people heard what the governor had to say and are anxious and went outside. And so we all need to be sending the strong message in our communications and our messaging. Stay at home. We still have cases. We still have concentration. And Dr. Gales, would you like to, with my remaining minute and a half, emphasize or agree or disagree or elaborate on anything I've just said?
I agree with everything you said and support it. I don't have anything to add other than, I think that just the brief point is, we recognize this is really hard. And we're asking people to do things that we've never asked them to do before. And it's tricky to the earlier comment that when you see other jurisdictions opening up, you can say, well, why can't we do that? We are doing this to keep you safe. I can't underscore enough that when we look at the data, we're just simply not there. And so by doing this and continuing this, we're moving in the right direction, but we need to see more sustained positive movement because to Councilmember Navarro's point is we can't afford to have a spike. And that's the thing that we're all afraid of because as we're trying to recover, if we get hit with another spike, that's going to be a significant blow to the system. So we're just asking folks to be patient. What we're doing is consistent with the guidelines to keep you safe at home.
Thank you, Dr. Gales, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, thank you, Dr. Gales, for all of your work. Yeah, the governor's executive order expires tonight, so our action today is just to maintain the safety orders that have been put in place. The safety orders that have helped mitigate the rate of infection in our community. At the very beginning of this pandemic, we talked about the need to flatten the curve. And while there have been increases in the rate of infection, in the death rate, we are in a much better position than had we not done anything. And I think those are really the options before us. Open up our government and society, or try to continue making everybody safe. And the data and science is informing us to keep doing what we're doing. I appreciate the regional approach. We have to have a regional approach. We are not an island unto ourselves. And so the collaboration at COG and within the health officials and with the executives throughout the region is a good one and needs to be maintained. And I know that constituents have already been asking for the metrics so that they can keep tabs on our progress, so that as the county executive issued yesterday and as is in this executive order, people want to check our own progress, I think, which is good and it's healthy. And ultimately, we're taking this action to make sure our residents are safe and healthy. Last thing I'll say is that these are uncharted waters, but we need to continue sailing towards safe harbor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I will try to be brief. I think this is one of the most consequential conversations that we've had, so I hope that we take all the time that we need to seriously consider it. But, we've consistently said, all of us at every level or every branch of county government, that we have to rely on data and scientific guidance as we navigate through this public health emergency. I think that's what we have done to date, and that's what we are doing here, which I really appreciate. I do only support reopening the county when we have decided that it is safe to do so. But we do have to make these decisions in the most transparent and accountable way, because residents and businesses understandably are frustrated and are concerned as we face record unemployment, as there are existential threats to those families, as there are other issues, not just related to this crisis, that they are dealing with on a regular basis. I sent a memo over to you, Dr. Gales, and I'm hoping we could get detailed responses. I wanted to hit a few of the points as I have time to do here to see if we can answer them. But are we currently tracking the metrics that are listed in the order, and where do we stand today on those specific metrics?
Yes, so we are tracking them, and that's part of the reason why we selected those, is they're things that we would be able to have the data and make that readily available to folks at home. And that's a combination of getting data from the state as well as the National Capital Region. There's a number of sources that we look to do that. And as I mentioned, the team is working to create an easily accessible and readable and digestible document for on our county website for folks to follow at home. So in terms of some of those specific graphics, again, I'm looking at your memo now. We have made progress in terms of a number of areas. For example, with our soon-to-be launched extended testing effort, we will be close to hitting that capacity to be able to test 5%. We've had significant conversations related to infrastructure around equity. We're meeting with Chief Equity Officer Ward to talk through partnerships to discuss those issues. As it relates to some of the other hard metrics, so for hospitalization rate, right now our hospitalization rate has plateaued. The percentage of ICU bed usage has gone up. The percentage of acute bed usage has gone down, is trending downward, but the ICU usage does remain fairly high.
Yeah.
Our utilization of...
I appreciate it. I just want to reserve some of my time, but I think it would be helpful to have the specific metrics by number, and for that to be shared not only with the council but publicly. And so I don't want to take too much time here, but if we could get that like by 5 o'clock today of what we already have and where we currently stand, and a plan for when the display that you talked about that's going to be a little bit easier to understand will be shared publicly, I would appreciate that. In terms of the metrics within our control, do we have a detailed plan, kind contact tracing and testing capacity, for instance, do we have a detailed plan for when we expect to get there in terms of the benchmarks that you've listed in the order?
Yes, we do.
Can you share that with us?
We talked extensively this morning about our contact tracing piece. We've talked extensively about our testing component. So the testing component, I'm confident that based upon getting contract signed, we will be at that capacity point within the next week. As it relates to contact tracing, again, we're working with the state, the NORC system. That system goes live next week. Once that system goes live, then we can truly say we have the capacity to be able to contact folks within a 24-hour period across the state that would achieve that. So we're talking in the 7 to 10 day range for some of those less concrete measures. So yes, we have a plan for both of those.
Appreciate it. And what, if any, additional resources would you need in order to hit these benchmarks that are within our control?
I think the one that's probably the one that is a little bit less teased out is the contact tracing piece, and in large part that is because we're working with the state. So as we talked about this morning, we anticipate we would need now to do the initial 24-hour contact tracing. That is once the state system is in place, we can confirm that is the case for our residents included. But as we grow the system in terms of sustaining it, we would need to hire approximately 100 to 150 additional folks just to provide support. Now, we don't need to have that in place fully to be able to say we've met that particular goal. But in terms of a long-term sustainable plan, that's what we're looking to do.
Great. And have there any decisions been made on curbside pickup for retail establishments other than restaurants? Has that discussion or any decisions been made on that?
Well, we've decided against it again, and that's consistent with the approach of all of our partners in the area, D.C. as well as Northern Virginia.
That's not
okay.
nice.
I'll wrap up. I appreciate the answers. There are other questions specifically related to some that are empirically obvious and some that aren't. And if you could follow up with us with that, we'd really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I apologize to all of my colleagues and guests. I'm just coming back from being outside with Catholic Charities giving out food, and it's apropos to talk about what it is that we're continuing to see on the front lines. We had 800 people that came through, 500 that received food, and 300 that then had to get gift cards. And it was staggering because there were hundreds of cars still in line, wrapped all the way through Borough Park, and then also up and down through 55 coming from both ways. And I know that that is tied directly to what it is that we're talking about today in the executive order, and it's tied to people being out of work, but it also is highlighting the need that was out there from the very beginning. And I want to remind folks of that as well. And I really want to thank each and every one of you because the money that we've allocated is helping these families in need. And so I just want to let you know I've seen it going to great lengths and great work, and people are so appreciative. Now, that being said, as the husband of a business owner, a small business owner who is now going to continue to remain closed, it's tough, but it's the right thing to do. I care about her safety. I care about the safety of my family. I care about the safety of her patrons, who I've come to know and love as business patrons of my wife, but also friends of the family. I care about their safety as well. And I can't distance myself from that and just saying that solely based on the fact of that I want to see our economy try and get back on track, that I'm going to put aside what I care about in terms of their safety and well-being. And that applies to all businesses and all patrons and all employees that are out there. We are not doing this to damage business. We are doing this to make sure that we can protect people and keep them safe. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear everything that everybody said, but I will just tie in to what Councilmember Friedson said. We did say at the beginning we would base this on guidance from our public health officials when we first did this. And so we have the guidance from Dr. Gales, but we also have the guidance on a national level from Dr. Fauci, who's also been out there and been very open and adamant about the fact of folks rushing in too soon. I don't want to be one of those communities. I don't want to be a community who then, when we're Monday morning quarterbacking this, says, oh, well, if Montgomery County only hadn't rushed in too soon, we could have saved lives. I want to be on the other side. I want to be on the side that says, you know what? While it was really tough for a lot of folks and it was really difficult, we saved as many lives as we possibly could. And I feel with doing this executive order and supporting it, that's what we can say at the end of the day. And so I just really want to, again, thank all of my colleagues. I can tell you, folks were singing our praises today. We have been doing great work, and it continues to happen. And this is going to be just yet another chapter in that great book of what great things Montgomery County has done during this pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. And Councilmember Reamer, you had less than 1 minute. You said, so I'm going to hold you to less than 1 minute, please.
So I just want to say I'm concerned that the state is doing it this way. I mean, the state could prefer to issue very clear requirements as to when counties will be allowed to reopen and then maintain that decision at the state level. Instead, I really view this as sort of passing the buck down to the county to have to make the tough decision about closing, remaining closed, and then figuring out how to reopen. That is what it is. I guess the only thing we need to really watch closely, Dr. Gales, and we'll be working with you through this process, is does the state feel like their urgency is going to diminish now that they are no longer owning, such a massive decision, but rather they've allowed reopening, in many parts of the state. So we need to be sure that the state continues to follow through with its aggressive support to us for our health and emergency response and testing and tracing and all of those measures, because some parts of the state are reopening does not in any way mean that we are in an urgent crisis.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice, you had about a minute left too, so go ahead.
No, it's just going to take 15 seconds. Just Dr. Gales and whoever is on from the executive side. I just received an email from Montgomery County Commission for Women that highlights the governor's order and talks about and doesn't say anything about Montgomery County locally. We just need to make sure that we're checking things like that, and it actually comes from a public gov delivery address, so it makes it seem as though it's being communicated from us, and that was at 1:31 p.m. So we got to be cautious about the information we're putting out there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I did want to say that I, too, am supportive of this. I realized early on, and Dr. Gales, very publicly, thank you for what you're doing for all of Montgomery County, and candidly for the state of Maryland. You are there when we have needed you to be there. You have given us guidance. Sometimes we didn't want to hear that guidance, but you gave us the guidance with the science and the data was showing. And that's exactly where we are today. I'm appreciative of that. I'm supportive of this. Maryland is not a one-size-fits-all state. It is very different in Allegheny, as in our good friends in Garrett County. It is very different there than it is here. And therefore, I understand how the governor had to make his decisions, but Montgomery County and other areas, some more urban areas, need to make a different decision for right now. And hopefully we can come back and lift this order as quickly as we can. This is not fun, but this is necessary. And with that, I am going to ask if there is a motion.
Can I ask a point of clarification about the order?
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, point of clarification. The metrics that are in here, there's a could be reference at the bottom of the first page. Does that mean, this is speaking to Councilman Reamer's question that I don't think was really answered, are those binding? Are they suggestions of things that might be considered by the executive branch but not really part of the formal decision that's being made? I mean, I don't think that's been particularly clear to us, and certainly not to the public. So could we formally clarify that before we take this vote, please?
Who would answer that? Mr. Drummer?
I'll take a shot at it. It's in I think the action part of the order is the stay-at-home order and that portion. The portion you're talking about is an indication of what the executive and the council and the Dr. Gales are looking at to lift the order, but it's going to take an actual action by everybody to lift it. So I guess the answer to your question is they're not absolute. Those are the factors we're looking at, that the executive and the health officer is looking at now, but that's not in the action portion of the order. And that goes to the question we heard earlier, that It's not self-disappearing. If certain things happen, it doesn't go away. It's going to require an actual action to lift the restrictions. And therefore,
And can you confirm the actual action is that of the executive or both the executive? I mean, respectfully, this is one of the most consequential decisions that we made during this.
Everybody else can
Could you
vote.
confirm? I mean, I'm not going to vote if I don't have the answers to these
Well, then
questions.
you didn't have that opportunity.
Could you confirm that the council has to take action, or that the executive can act in absence of the council, since it's an executive order that we just happen to be voting on?
well, Mark Hansen's here also as Sylvia Kinch. It's really not crystal clear, but our best advice is that the governor's order talks about political subdivisions, which includes the governing body, which would be both the executive and the council.
I agree with Bob. I think that the way the governor's order is structured, it is giving authority to the county, and in my mind, that means the governing body of the county and the executive and the council together form the governing body. So a change in the order, in my view, would require the same formality that we're going through to approve it in the first place.
Okay.
If there wasn't a motion, I don't know if with the executive order. Yeah, second.
I'd like to, yeah.
Well, yeah, like Gabe should move it. Councilmember Albanese.
Councilmember Albanese, did you make the motion?
Yes, I would like to move the executive order.
Second.
And it was seconded by Councilmember Giwando. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. I did want my colleagues to know that I do have a call with Andrew Klein at 5 o'clock this evening. And if anyone has suggestions for the committees that he was suggesting this morning, please let me know by 5 o'clock. I haven't actually had a chance to read the information that he sent, but please let me know by 5 o'clock, and I will let him know that information as well. Thank you very much for Councilmember.
Did Andrew share those slides this morning so we know the names of the different groups?
I have no idea. I have not opened the email. I was on back-to-back Zoom calls. I know that he sent me the information, or sent all of us the information.
Okay, fine.
Flow chart. He included a flow chart that has names.
Great.
So I just sent Councilman President Katz just one overarching issue. I think that we've worked so well together during the crises. I would like for that to continue in terms of the recovery. So I would respectfully request that we work jointly to design and have input into the framework as well. In the flow chart, it only shows one council representative. I think it's very important that we continue this level of collaboration, active collaboration also through the recovery. So that's my one overarching question that I've shared with you, Council President, because I think that we need to do more to just have one council liaison to something that is so consequential as a reopening.
And was it for each committee, one liaison, or one for the whole group?
The chart only had one council liaison for the whole effort. I think that we should be much more involved, especially when we have committees that have been working on many of these issues. We worked so well during the actual pandemic. I think we should have more input into the structure of the committees or the topics of the committees, and we have expertise, et cetera, feedback from constituents. So again, it wouldn't be a change from what we have done up until now. I would just like to request that spirit of collaboration continue.
Okay. Thank you very much. If anybody else has any other suggestions, 5 o'clock is when I'm supposed to have the call. Not that I have a few others in between. Thank you very much.
Are we still on here?
We are one, I guess, yeah.
I should have mentioned this earlier, but you actually technically need to waive the rules to adopt the resolution and the same day it's introduced.
Okay. Is there a motion to do that? It was moved by Vice President Hucker, seconded by Councilmember Glass to waive the rules. All those in favor, please raise your hand. So the rules. Now, do we need to vote again, Mr. Drummer? Why don't we, just to be on
Yeah,
the safe side?
I guess the safest
There's
thing
no
is
need to. And the motion was made before by Councilmember Albornoz and
I'll make-
seconded,
Yep, I'll make the motion again to move the executive order.
and it was Vice President Hucker who seconded, I believe, right? Was that right?
I think it was
Yes.
Will. I don't think it matters.
Oh, well, it was yeah, very good. Well, can I say your Vice President Juando at this minute? No. Councilmember Juando seconded it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously as well, just to be on the safest side. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Sydney.